Welcome back to Atlanta Diaries. I'm your host, Enma Popley. Thank you for joining me. In Atlanta Diaries, we celebrate unique and inspiring stories of breakthrough women to help future generations create their own. If you want to know more about Atlanta or listen to more episodes, you can visit my website www.enmapopley.com. You can also share feedback or suggestions there. My guest today is Dr. Radha Kessar. Radha is a mathematician and an educator, working in the representation theory of finite groups, a branch of abstract algebra. She is a professor in pure mathematics at the University of Manchester, having previously been the only woman to have been a professor of mathematics at the University of Aberdeen. Radha has won the Berwick Prize of the London Mathematical Society, where she was the first woman recipient since the prize's inception in 1946. The other honors include a Simons Visiting Professorship at MSRI in Berkeley and an invited lecture at the European Congress of Mathematicians. In our conversation, Radha patiently shared what being a mathematician means. And what stood out for me was how she labeled her emotions as she navigated and excelled in this non-traditional career. Without further ado, let's listen to Radha's fascinating journey. Hi, Radha. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Enma. Thanks for having me.
When I was doing research yesterday, I was reflecting and I realized that you and I go back 45 years.
That's right.
From kindergarten, Vivek School, all the way to good old Carmel Convent, and then reconnected thanks to the pandemic.
That's right. Pandemic was great only for one thing, and that was to get back in touch with old friends.
Well, I remember Radha as this soft-spoken, unassuming, very endearing person. And this drives me to ask my first question. Do you think Radha today is any different from the schoolgirl Radha, which I remember very fondly?
No, I think fundamentally I'm the same person. Of course, gotten older, hopefully a little bit wiser. I don't know if anybody really does. There's this old saying by some Capuchin monk who says, "Show me the child when he is 7 and I will show you the man." Somehow, lots of things are, by the time you're 7, according to this monk, your personality is sort of quite set. So I don't find myself being very different. I've learned a few things in life. It would be very sad if I hadn't in 53 years.
I love that, that context. I knew you were up for big and unique things, but was it always going to be math?
Not at all. I always liked maths, but I liked other subjects as well. And I had no particular intention to go into maths. I always had a feeling for numbers, and it was very important for me to understand the maths that we were being taught. So if there was some point which I didn't get, it used to bother me a lot. But, was no way was I planning to make a career out of it. I think one of the most influential incidents, for sort of pushing me more towards mathematics was when we were in class 12. I heard about a maths program for high school students at Ohio State University called the Ross program. It's a very old and venerated summer training camp for mathematics for high school or even middle school students. And I heard about it from Professor Bamba, mathematician at Punjab University and very, very good friend of my parents. So he told me about this program, and he knew very well Professor Ross, who ran the program at Ohio State. And so through that connection, I spent 2 months in this dormitory at Ohio State University with a bunch of math geeks, basically immersed in mathematics for, 18 hours a day or whatever. That did turn on my interest quite a bit. And then I came back and I went to Punjab University Honours School in math. But I didn't think of it as being a career. And then after that, just one thing led to another. When I was finishing my honours school, I just applied, to various American universities. Then I got into Ohio State. And then I was doing my PhD. And I said, okay, let me do my PhD. Then I'll see what I'll do. And then I happened to get one postdoc. Then I had another postdoc. Then I got another postdoc, then I got a permanent job. And then at some point, I guess I woke up and realized that that's what I was going to do.
That's really interesting. Did you always know that you will leave India, or was that also just a series of coincidences?
I guess, there's an element of coincidence or happenstance in everything that happens with us. I guess I was not hell-bent on leaving India. And I certainly didn't think that I would end up living outside of India, for the rest of my life. But I was very attracted by the possibility of being independent. As a girl, I felt like in Chandigarh, you didn't come home by 6:30. My mother would be out on the street, worried, where is she? And so many times I remember seeing her like standing on the gate or whatever, because I'm a little bit late. And I could understand why she was worried, because it was not a safe place for a girl to be walking around alone. And just the idea that, okay, if I went to the US or somewhere in Europe, I could go to the shops at 8 o'clock by myself and it would be fine. That was very attractive for me.
You're talking about a time when there was no internet, when it's not like mom could call you up every single day and find out have you come back home or not. So how did she deal with it and how did you sort of put them at ease,
I think she was sad because I was not there, but they were perfectly okay with my going. And I think they knew that I really wanted to go. And anyway, it was an opportunity. And the other thing that did help, especially my mother, was because I went back to Ohio State. And she knew people there because of the connection with Professor Bamba and some other professors of Indian origin at Ohio State, whom my parents knew. I think she felt that somebody would be watching out for me to some extent. I didn't have to struggle to convince them to let me go.
Yeah, it always gives you a sense of comfort that there's somebody there watching out for you, and that's what parents want, right? Yeah. Rather shifting gears a little bit, first I'm giving you a heads up. I understand people issues more than maths and science, right? And I was doing your research and I was like, this is really not easy to even comprehend all that you achieved. So pardon me if I ask you very silly questions,
No, it won't be silly.
So to a layperson, how will you explain your role as a mathematician? How you would talk to a dummy about your role?
So I can't really explain the math I'm doing, because for that, it's like, like in Western classical music, you have to be able to learn, you have to know how to read the notes before you can do anything. And so mathematics is also, it's a language in itself. So before you can really start talking about it, you have to put in a bit of a slog to learn the language, the basics. And most people who are not mathematicians, obviously they don't know that language, like most people who are not musicians, don't know how to read music. So I guess at some level you could say that you have the feeling that you are finding the truth and you're uncovering some very deep mysteries. Okay, the universe of mathematics, a lot of that, how that universe is constructed, comes from real world problems, but by the time it gets to mathematics, it's become abstract, because that's what mathematics does. So somebody like me, in my area of mathematics, we are working in a very high level of abstraction. But the feeling is that there's kind of all these truths that are waiting to be discovered, and then you're discovering those. And so every time you prove a theorem, that's the feeling you have. You think, okay, now you've found something that nobody has ever found before, and you've learned something, and most importantly, you've understood something. And I think that's what drives most mathematicians, that feeling that, oh, okay, now you understand this.
What was the most exciting moment as a mathematician, or which really gave you that sense of purpose?
Okay, so I have to say that for me, it's never transcended into this feeling that, like, this is my mission. And I think different mathematicians are different. I should say the moments of gratification are few and far between. Yeah, most of the time it's quite frustrating because you're working at the boundaries of your knowledge and your imagination, and you have to push them. And that's hard. And most of the time you're running up a blind alley or something, and you can realize after weeks or months of thinking about something that A, what you were thinking is completely wrong, or B, it's too hard. You won't be able to do it. But sometimes, from time to time, something works. And then for me, it's like a load off my mind. When I finally see how that thing is going to work, and I'm like, I can sleep well and I can relax for a little while. So for me, it just gets to a kind of obsessiveness where I start dreaming about some very garbled way about my problem. Sometimes in my dreams, I confuse myself with mathematical object. I think, oh, and then I wake up in the morning, I'm completely confused. Am I a person or am I linear transformation or whatever? It, almost like when you're running a race or something and you know you're reaching the end point. And then you're like, wow, okay, this is going to happen now. And then it gets very exciting. And I mean, a lot of the work is joint work. I work with a lot of people. I have this one colleague with whom I do a lot of work at a German university. And it can happen that sometimes we exchange 200 emails a day just because we're both on our computers. And we're like, oh, do you think this works like this? No, it doesn't work like this. I think this is how to do it. And then, it gets so intense. But then there'll be long fallow periods where nothing happens. I go to my office and I just sit there. I mean, okay, I do my teaching, other admin work, whatever. And I can just sit there for 5 hours and come back home having not made any progress.
So, the fact that you said that there are moments of highs and lows. So how do you then keep yourself driven?
So I have a very good mathematician friend at the University of Aberdeen, and he's an absolutely brilliant mathematician. He once told me that, every time I prove a theorem, I think this might be the last theorem I prove. Because you never know. It's just that eureka moment, we all think, well, maybe it's not going to happen again. It's not fully understandable why that eureka moment happens. Okay, one way to keep going is that most mathematicians are not just thinking about one problem at a time. There's several things that you have in the back of your mind. Oh, you want to try this or you want to try this. So if something becomes too frustrating, you usually either give it a break for a year or a few weeks or whatever, however long, or you never come back to it. It can happen with mathematicians that they, stop producing. And because like some mathematicians, they only want to do very, very hard things, extremely difficult problems or whatever. And those are, obviously, the chances of success in those are low. And then some just will say, okay, if I can't do these really hard problems, I don't want to do slightly less exciting research. But most of us, like myself included, I just do the next thing that comes along. I don't put too much value judgment on whether the question is very important or will get a lot of attention or not. If it looks interesting and I feel I have something that I can contribute, I'll usually just think about it.
Just trust the process, looks like it.
That's right, yeah. And then sometimes you can have years where, you have papers, but they're, not particularly very important or very good. Maybe nobody will look at them ever. Or you can have a paper which sits for 10 years without anybody ever looking at it. And then suddenly it becomes important. So it's a very slow process of the vindication. It's like, you just do what you can do. And then maybe it will take, maybe it won't take.
And was teaching the obvious path also?
Mostly like in mathematics, if you want an academic career, it will be teaching and research to go in hand. I mean, there are some jobs which are purely research, but there are very few of those. So most working mathematicians are, if you want a job at a university, you will teach. And I mean, that's a nice part of the job as well.
So what's the most fascinating part of your job?
Between teaching and research, I like teaching as well. But I have to say that my heart is more towards my research. I get much more excited by my research than I do about teaching. Yeah, I mean, this could be different for different people, but I would say most research active mathematicians would probably answer like I did.
Sure. Let's shift gears a little bit, Radha. You grew up in India, studied then in the US, and largely, or rather more recently, have worked in the UK, right? And I would imagine you've worked with, sort of students and people across cultures. Is there like a common theme which you saw as you navigated all these different themes and nuances?
Yeah, very common theme. And I think it's possibly quite special to mathematics, or maybe to some other physical sciences. It's unbelievable how similar everybody is that I meet. So I just moved universities in September from London to Manchester, and almost nothing changes. I had to report for the first day of work, it was 1st of September. So I took the train up from London. I went to the head of department's office to say, "Hi, Andrew, I'm here." He's like, "Oh, excellent, great." Took me to the, secretary and said, "Oh, so here's Professor Kessar. Do you have a key for her office?" She said, "Yes." Took me to my office. I opened my computer and it was like I was in my old job. And then I went to to coffee. This is one thing that happens in, well, I guess all academic departments. Every day there's either some coffee or tea, and you just go and you say hi to a few people and you start talking, and it's like there's no change. I mean, they're different people, could be from different backgrounds, different cultures, different ethnicities, but it's very similar.
Any experiences, any anecdotes to validate what you're saying?
I guess a few superficial differences. So, if like in India, I would still, so the professors I had at Punjab University, I still will call them Professor so-and-so. I mean, for the rest of my life. Say, even if I were to become their colleague, say I was to go back to Punjab University and, get a job there, whatever, those people would still be professor for the rest of my life. Here in the UK or in the US, it's all first name basis. So there are these, few differences of that sort. Yes, it's true that sometimes students from, it's part and parcel of the same thing, from, say, India or China, or whatever, will be more reverential, towards their teachers and more shy and not put themselves forward maybe that much. But you can get past that very quickly and you realize that actually people are pretty much the same, wherever you go. One of the very nice things, actually, I have to say about my job, about my career, is that I really like my colleagues. People are on the whole nice to each other. There's not too much backbiting or competitiveness. There is some competitiveness, obviously, but it hardly ever gets nasty. And so you can kind of mostly, easy and cordial and meaningful relationships with your colleagues, which I think is not so common in all professions.
Yeah. Having said that, Radha, did you ever experience imposter syndrome or any kind of self-doubt?
I mean, a lot of doubts, and I think they continue to some extent to this day. So when I started my PhD, I was not at all sure that I was cut out for this business, that I would ever be able to do anything. And I felt constantly that I was not good enough. Even after my PhD for many years, I had a lot of doubt about myself, about whether this was the right thing for me to do. And I wouldn't say that anything happened to suddenly switch off those doubts, but I think I got more used to just living with them and dealing with them. Now I think much less about those things than I used to.
So what kind of doubts? From an academic perspective, I wouldn't imagine that Radha will have those kind of doubts.
Oh, yeah. Doubts were all from the academic perspective. That you're just not good enough to ever produce any meaningful mathematics.
So was there any point when you sort of rethought about your decision or, thought of running away from it, for lack of a better word?
Yeah, I mean, for quite a few years, I just felt, I'm just doing this up right now. And maybe I'm just going to chuck it and get a law degree or do an MBA or go and work for the World Bank. I mean, all the time I had these thoughts that this is too difficult. It's too challenging. I'm not cut out for it because I don't like to spend 18 hours of my day just thinking about mathematics. I like to think about other things. I like to do other things. And it doesn't seem to me that you can have a career unless you're one of these people who wants to just, think about maths all the time. It was actually constant refrain in my head, but I kept on working. So it was kind of funny. I kept on working, doing what I could. And then at some point, I think they just kind of fed up or whatever of the doubts, and I stopped thinking about them that much. And it was totally because, you meet people who are so brilliant that you'll never hold a candle to them. Their imagination, their feeling is of a level that you're never going to reach. You just have to deal with that. Yeah, I mean, there's so many of my colleagues or whatever who are just, I mean, miles and miles ahead of me, and I'll never have that vision that they have. It's like Marcus, my husband, he likes to give this analogy because he's a mathematician, but he's also a musician. And he's a classical violinist and very serious one. But he says that it's like in music, maybe there are 20 people in the world who are capable of making a solo career. Everybody knows their name. Say Joshua Bell or Itzhak Perlman or whatever. There are these few, Yo-Yo Ma playing the cello, whatever. So we know the names of these people. And then there's all these other very talented musicians who will be concert masters or just in the orchestra of some, decent, very good orchestra across the world or in some European city or some American city or whatever. And the gap between those guys, the concert master level and the soloists, it's just unbridgeable. So somebody like me who's reasonably successful, like I've managed to survive and become reasonably senior in my role, and I've done things, but then there's the next level of mathematician, and it gets very rarefied, the atmosphere up there. That's a totally different level. And you have to deal with that I'm never going to be in that level.
So, can I explore a little bit more on this?
Yes, of course, as much as you like.
This really takes me back to Radha saying this more out of, I feel, modesty and humility more than anything else.
No. I mean, not at all. Not at all. It's how it is, the fact.
Mm-hmm. Is it that you don't aspire to get there, or is it that you understand that, okay, this is where I am and I'm good at this and I don't need to go any further? Or that's my capability and I know I can't do more than this?
So it's not that you settle, you say, okay, this is my level and I'm going to stay at that level. Not at all. You're constantly pushing yourself. But I mean, there are just a few people whose brain is, I don't know, so special. They'll see miles ahead of you. And you're not working in any kind of competition or anything. It just happens like that. And then you read a paper by them and you're like, gosh, how did he or she think of this, or how did they do it? And
How are they wired?
how are they wired? Yeah.
Yeah, so this takes me to an earlier guest, Meenakshi, who's a planetary scientist. And as I was researching her, I also landed up reading about her husband, who is an astronaut and a doctor. And
Wow.
he has gone down to the Titanic.
Gosh.
I mean, it's insane, Radha. And I then bought his autobiography called The Sky
right.
Below.
Yeah.
And I started reading it and I totally get what you're saying. You just wonder, how are these people wired? This is really interesting. And I love the way you gave the music analogy, right? Given that the kind of profession you're talking about, which not everybody will even understand it, right?
That's right.
So who's been your go-to person? Love to talk a little bit about your mentorship journey.
I mean, I've been very, very fortunate. I've had very, very supportive and good mentors actually all through. I mean, I think I would say that I learned the value of thinking very deeply about things from my father, because he's an academic. This, importance of understanding something deeply. That I learned from him. Then I mentioned him before, Professor Bamba. He's been a constant mentor from the beginning. So because of him, I was able to go to this Ross program. And then because I had gone to the Ross program, I was 15 days too late to join PU. And there, the administrative office didn't allow me to start the BSc program because they said she's too late. And Professor Bamba, who was actually the vice chancellor of the university at that time, he made a special rule for me to allow me to, so that's the level of support that I got from him. Then, my PU professors, especially Professor Luther, our common friend Mira's dad, he was the most inspirational teacher, I have to say. He was a maths professor at PU, one of my lecturers. Unbelievable. and another Professor Pasi. They were very good role models. With them in the classroom, I saw what it is to really love mathematics. And then at Ohio State, my PhD supervisor was extremely supportive. And then even, when I was a young postdoc, there were lots of people who helped me and, just gave me jobs, basically.
Rather, are there enough women in the field? And do you think there's enough awareness about, like you yourself said that you didn't know that you're going to become a mathematician?
First of all, no, there's not enough women. And there's actually lots of efforts that are made to bring up the number of women in mathematics. And like in many other professions, there's a pyramid. If you look at undergraduate numbers in maths, there may even be more women or, not equal amount of women. And then at every stage, it becomes fewer and fewer and fewer women. And for various reasons, it's a very punishing career. You can't really dictate where you're going to end up. That's one of the big issues with a career in mathematics, because there's not many jobs. So if you say, oh, I've grown up in this part of England, I want to stay here, you can forget it. You might just get a job in Alabama, and then that's where you have to go. There's other considerations. It's competitive. It's constant pressure on yourself to produce research. And so by the time you get to, say, professor level, like full professor, my age or younger, but I mean, that level of seniority, it's still very low. So for example, in this now, my new department, I think it's a huge department, and I'm not sure I have the exact numbers, but there is at least 70 maybe permanent faculty and 25 full professors, and only 3 of us are women.
So does that bother you, and does that sort of segue into your mentorship journey where you might have motivated or would want to motivate more women to stay the course?
Of course, I want that, and I see that more senior female around does have a positive impact on younger females. Yeah, one needs kind of a critical mass so that there's enough of a population of women for newer entrants to not perceive that there's an extra hurdle to a career just because they are women. I don't very actively take part in mentorship programs, not because I'm opposed to them, but it hasn't naturally happened that much. But I think passively,
You mean informally or just maybe
informally, yeah,
informal?
not
Right,
passively, I
right.
should say informally. I mean, even formally also, I get involved in certain things, but I think actually the informal influence is more long-lasting and has more of an impact.
What do you think are the mentorship goals?
I mean, there's some practical things, of course, that you do as a mentor. How do you get your first paper published? You advise people, well, try this journal, and I know this person is on the editorial board. They like this kind of stuff. Why don't you send your paper there? Some very, very practical things like that. Oh, jobs. There's a job. I know this person. I've heard of this job there. Maybe you should write to them and see whether they would consider you. Obviously, we all do that. You write letters of recommendation for younger people all the time. I mean, that's like, I think I do at least one a week at various levels for undergraduates, postgraduates, postdocs, lecturers, promotion letters, assistant professor to associate professor to full professor, whatever. Yeah, I mean, but these are, in some sense, they're all part and parcel of your job description.
Radha, you said you work with a lot of people, right? So is it more peers? Is that more for research?
Okay, yeah, it's all for research. And I work with all levels of people at all levels of seniorities. For example, one of my most frequent co-authors is Marcus. So
okay.
we write papers, I don't know, maybe we have 25 papers together or something. So that's a very senior person. And I have other collaborators, like this German person about whom I said with the 200 emails or whatever. He's much more senior than me even. But then like today, there's a young female mathematician from Turkey. She's on sabbatical and she wants to spend the whole year in Manchester and talk to me. And maybe we have a joint project. So, spending some time with her. And I also have visiting an ex-PhD student of mine. He finished a year and a half ago his PhD. Now he's a postdoc, but he's come for a week just to discuss math, what other projects he could do. And I spent my whole afternoon actually talking to these young people today. And so it's at all levels.
Were there any setbacks in the journey? And any mistakes you feel where, with the wisdom of hindsight, you learn?
Yeah, actually, I think these self-doubts are a mistake because they don't get you anywhere and they're just a waste of time. I mean, okay, I believe that you should have a good balanced view about yourself, but also balanced set of expectations of yourself. And I do think that I spent way too much time when I was starting out concentrating on the doubts. It would have been better to not worry so much about it, and just been more confident, or because they're not really much use for anything, too many self-doubts, right? What are you going to do with it?
So, with the wisdom of hindsight, how would you deal with it differently? What would you tell your younger self?
I would tell my younger self, well, yeah, it's fine, some people are smarter than you, but that's fine. You can live with that. You can still make good contributions and valuable contributions without being, the most brilliant mathematician in the world.
Was there any go-to person when you had these self-doubts?
So Marcus actually helped a lot with that. A lot, because he does not have self-doubts like that. I mean, he doesn't have a very inflated opinion of himself or anything, but he just doesn't think in those terms. So he does not compare himself to other people, right? And I think I suffered quite a lot from that. Constantly comparing, oh man, this guy is so smart. I can never do what they did. And you can actually, do too much of that. And I did it. So, and Marcus helped a lot for that. And then, no, I had a very good advice from lots of people. So I can tell you one very funny story, which my PhD supervisor, he put everything in perspective. When I was finishing my PhD, I got this job at Yale. And it was with this very, very eminent mathematician called Walter Veit, very famous in my area. And he happened to be the supervisor of my advisor. I was really excited, but I was also really freaked out because I was like, I'm going to go to Yale and I'm going to be speaking with Walter Veit. And then he's going to realize, what an idiot I am. I mean, I won't know how to talk to him. And I don't know anything. And so I actually went to Ron's office, my advisor, and I was like, I'm not sure I should be doing this because what on earth am I going to discuss with Walter Veit? And then he said to me, and that was really good. He said, well, don't worry about it because Walter is used to being smarter than everybody he meets.
I love that.
He won't be shocked to find out that he's smarter than you. And that helped because I realized that, yes, okay, yeah. And then actually it was fine. I mean, Professor Veit was very sweet and there was no issues.
Did you have the same self-doubt even when you were in India? Or was it more when you went to the US and you talked about all the geeks?
No, I didn't have self-doubts in school particularly, but then,
In university, also no. In BSc honors, also no.
not so much in BSc honors at all. I wasn't that bothered about that. Yeah, I mean, it was not that, it was neither here nor there really. But so this math program I went to, this Ross program, there were people, some of whom now are like, the leading mathematicians of the world who I met there. And already there, it was clear to me, that these kids are, some of them, not all, but I mean, definitely, they're more talented than I am.
Yet you wanted to pursue it. When I think about it, Radha, you are saying from BSc onwards, you went there every 2 months. So you knew the kind of people around you. So obviously there's something which also told you that this is your calling, for lack of a better word.
I guess so. I mean, the way I approached it was like in a very piecemeal fashion. I was like, okay, I know I'm not particularly very good, but now I've got this PhD place. I'll go and I'll check it out. And then it was like, okay, well, I'm not that great or anything, but let me at least finish my PhD and then I'll see. So I had enough interest. I enjoyed it enough, I think, to keep going despite all the doubts.
Did you come back to your dad and talk to him about all these things?
Yeah. I mean, I used to tell him, both my parents, really dumb and I'm not doing well at all. That's what I used to tell them on the phone. And so I think they were quite shocked when I actually finished my PhD because they're like, from the news I was giving them, I think they expected me to be coming back, And that's what they used to keep telling me all the time on the phone. If it's too hard or whatever, just don't worry, just come back home, just come back home. I think they didn't want me to, they thought I might be going into some, that I might go into some depression or something, and they wanted to avoid that.
Rather, do you think it's a man versus a woman thing? A lot of women have said this to me that if there's an application and there are 10 things required, a man will see two and say, okay, I think I can apply for this job. When the woman will see eight and say, no, I think I have to,
That's
I
right.
still don't have.
I think I definitely a victim of that, self-made victim of that to some extent. And actually, with distance, you see things, when you're not yourself not personally involved, you see it more. And so I really noticed it. I could see younger PhD students in action. I still remember this time the penny really dropped in Oxford, and we had a very eminent mathematician visiting the department. And there were some female graduate students and there were some male graduate students. And I knew the two women were actually better, or at least as good, but the dynamic between the girls and the boys, if I can call them that, vis-a-vis this eminent person was amazing, because the boys, they were just, asking questions and they didn't know what the hell they were talking about. I could tell because I knew a little bit more at that stage. And the two ladies were just quietly sitting there. And then I thought to myself, now, of course, 2 years down the line, when all these people are applying for jobs and they apply to this guy's university, he's going to remember the boys because they were just putting themselves forward. I mean, and it's not they were doing anything deliberately, but it's just the
Personality.
yeah. And I think that came from woman versus man. Nowadays, it's changed, I think. There's been a lot of effort, both training young women. They get a lot of training now on, not showing diffidence or not putting themselves down. And also, of course, there's lots of emphasis on awareness of unconscious bias and conscious bias. So it has changed. So when I see young women now, I don't know what's going on behind their heads. They don't put themselves down.
Right. So rather, I sort of researched around 300-400 women across the globe. Because when I coach younger women who are aspiring to be senior women leaders, these are the trends which I see. This whole lack of confidence, imposter syndrome, do I know enough? So a few questions very consistently came out in the survey. They said women have to prove their point, whereas men have to simply state it.
Yeah.
So what's your perspective on that? And any anecdotes when you experienced this?
So I would say, actually, I was thinking about that because I thought we might talk about this kind of thing, was that I would say personally, I got a lot of conscious support and maybe some unconscious bias against. But to be fair to my community, I have to say there was not too much conscious bias. I have a few incidents where I could tell that the person was not taking me seriously because I'm a female. And funnily, enough, it's not just from men. Sometimes from women, you get the same.
Yeah.
So, for example, when Marcus and I got together and we got married and then we were looking for jobs together and we got these jobs at Ohio State, and he's more senior than I am. So he was hired at a higher level than I was. And, he had a much better profile at that time because I was still starting out. Anyway, so I was at a conference, and me, as usual, I was talking to a female colleague, and I'm like, oh yeah, so she said, oh, congratulations, you guys are going to Ohio State, you both got jobs together, excellent. And I was like, yeah. And everything, like microcosm of what you shouldn't be doing in a professional context. I was like, yeah, but I'm really nervous because it's a tenure track position and it's really hard to get tenure. And I don't know if I'm, going to get this tenure. I'm really nervous about that. And then she said, well, don't worry. If they don't give you tenure, Marcus will leave too. So they won't want to do that,
Oh my God.
it's unconscious. She didn't really, I don't think she was trying to put me down or anything.
She was
But
putting him on a pedestal.
yeah. I mean, she was just perceiving us at the levels we were. So that was with her. So let's say from older men, right? These very old mathematicians or whatever. Sometimes I got really weird, what would now be seen really weird, and nobody would do that anymore. Like, again, when Marcus and I were looking for jobs together, there was another, I shouldn't mention the university because we were both sort of being considered for jobs at a university. So there was the big research university, which was considering us. And then, and there was one guy there who was very keen to hire us, but he was really keen on Marcus. That's all right. And then where he told me, yeah, so well, Marcus can come to the university and then, you can get a job in one of the colleges. So for him, it was clear that as a wife, that's good enough, that my husband gets the job, the big research job, and I'm a supporting role anyway, if
Totally, I know.
yeah. So yeah, there are just a few things like that.
Yeah. So this reminds me of when Viren and I moved to Chandigarh from Bombay, and Bombay is still very different, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah. Chandigarh.
I was running my own business in Chandigarh, my own training company, and he was, of course, heading the Swaraj business, which Mrs. Mohan's husband started, right? So I, in my own right, became a member of the Confederation of Indian Industries, the CII, the Punjab division. And I went for this meeting. And I remember this because of what you said. There are these young girls who are introducing me. And I came as a member. She is wife of Viren Popli. So I know exactly what you're saying. So people are the same everywhere, is
Yeah,
what I'm
people are the
hearing.
same everywhere, but it's changed a lot now. Now I don't think anybody would say anything like that because everybody's been trained, and it's good. We've all become aware of things.
The unconscious bias.
Yeah, and so I think it has improved quite a bit. I mean, one of the funny things that's happened in academia, it's really crazy actually. Now women get overworked like nobody's business because universities and academic bodies are under a lot of pressure to demonstrate diversity and equality. So every committee has to have a woman. And then there's not that many women, right, who are in that sufficiently high position. So we all keep getting
Invitation.
yeah, it's across the board. Like if there's conferences, so you invite speakers, you have to have a certain number of women. So I get way more conference invitations than I should or whatever, because they think you're stupid or anything. No, but it's just somehow it helps. Yeah, there's a woman, she's competent. If you put her in the list, it'll look good. I remember actually a male colleague of mine told me 5 years ago, we were all at this quite prestigious research institute in Berkeley called the Mathematical Sciences Research Institute. And they run these long programs where they invite mathematicians from around the world, and everybody's under pressure to have women or whatever. And this colleague of mine who was an organizer of that, he said, oh, Radha, I wish we could just clone 5 of you.
More Radhas everywhere, or a
Yeah,
Radha
life would
everywhere.
be so much easier. Yeah.
Right.
Oh.
So let's shift gears a little bit, since I've heard Marcus's name so much and you share that he's German and a musician. How does it feel to be married to someone from a different culture? And I can hear so many layers of cultural journeys you've navigated. So
Yeah, let me see. I got married from an Indian perspective quite late. I was 31, and I had already been living for 10 years on my own and in the US and the UK. And so I was hanging out all the time with obviously all kinds of people. So there was not that much adjustment
right.
to be made. That's how we got to know each other, was through mathematics. So that's sort of then was, that was the
Common thread.
common thread and the binding thing in many ways. And for example, I got to learn a lot about classic. No, I still don't know enough, but I learned about to appreciate Western classical music because of Marcus. So that was very nice. He practices every day. He plays the violin. So I get a little mini concert, in the evening every day.
How lovely.
My mother's biggest issue was, will he like Indian food? That she was so worried, oh my gosh, is he going to like Indian? But that was not a problem because he absolutely loves it and he can eat much spicier food than I can. So no problem there. Somehow, yeah, you understand that everybody is an individual and we all come with our own packages. And to some extent, you just take people for what they are. Yeah, there are differences, cultural differences, but it's okay. I mean, we're both sort of live and let live.
What does Radha do when Radha is not thinking about the next big theorem and the next big project?
I really like cinema, so I go quite often. And I like to read a lot. So I spend some time reading, hanging out with friends.
I got to know about some interesting outdoor activities.
So, right. Now, another thing that I got into for a while, and that's also because of Marcus, is cycling. Marcus is very much into doing long bicycle rides. So he's been in Alaska, he cycled in the Andes, he cycled across Australia, he cycled across Ethiopia, I don't know, and Tunisia, everywhere in Europe, Norway, Finland, Canada. So every couple of years, he does like a long trip. The first time he came to India, actually, he cycled from Chandigarh to Leh.
And you did it with him?
No, I flew and met him there at that time. But yeah, he really started out from my parents' house in the morning in Chandigarh, then got to Simla by night time, and then, I don't know, Simla, Manali.
And all by himself, alone?
Yeah, alone, with all his gear on his bicycle.
Looks like after Meenakshi's husband, I'll have to go and Google some more about Marcus and his journey.
You won't find much. So I've done a couple of very nice trips, cycling trips, long ones with Marcus. One was across from Paris all the way to Tyrol in Austria, so crossing some high alpine passes. And then one of the most amazing trips I did was with Marcus and his brother. We cycled for 8 to 10 days in Lahore and Spiti.
Oh, wow.
Through the valley, and I think we started in Rekong Peo and sort of went over very high passes and then ended up in Manali. So that was very exciting. I don't do that a lot now. Haven't been cycling for a long time, but I started playing a lot of tennis. And I told you, don't ask me about that because actually that's what I want to do now all the time.
Right. And Radha, what does Radha plan to do when she retires and if she retires?
I guess I'll keep doing, if my brain is still working, I guess I'll still probably will just keep doing some research as long as my brain works, I suppose. Yeah, I guess I'll play tennis if I can, as long as my body allows me. And I haven't really thought about it too much because
Because there is no retirement in the reckoning. Like you said, research till you can research.
Yeah. I probably, but it'll be nice. I mean, in some sense, because some of my colleagues who have retired, they're always telling me, oh, we recommend it highly because they can spend all their time doing research and they don't have to, do all the other university business.
Right. Given that you talk about Punjab University in such high, you're really regarded and stuff like that. So have you ever sort of gone back and mentored the students or gone and given shared your...
Yes, talks. I've given talks back at Punjab University. I hardly ever go to Chandigarh now because my dad lives in Delhi. But when I do go, I usually visit the department. I keep in touch with some of the people who are there, like especially, I mean, because she's my generation. I think she's the head of department there, Gurmeet. So, occasionally we have we have some professional contact. Yeah.
Interesting. Radha, what do you think are the factors which will attribute to your success? Given that you spoke about so much of self-doubt, which was in some level self-induced, right? Yeah. So what will you attribute your success to?
I mean, now that I'm thinking about these things, they are things that people have said over the years. which really make a difference. So, for example, another, as usual, coming from my own self-doubts, and I was like moaning about myself. There's no other word. I used to spend most of my time moaning, so dumb. I'm so dumb. To anybody who would hear me, I was like, I'm so dumb. I'm so dumb. I don't know whether I should stay in this business because I don't think I'm cut out for it. Anyway, and I was saying this to an older professor at Ohio State, and then he said something, and which now I do say to a lot of people if they talk to me about their doubts. And he said, the only thing you should concentrate on figuring out for yourself, as far as this career of research mathematician is concerned, is whether you enjoy it. When you're doing the research, or when you're reading or paper or thinking about a problem, do you enjoy it? And if the answer is yes, then stick with it, and everything else you will see, it will fall into place. So that's one of the main things I think I've fundamentally quite enjoyed. I like this stuff. And then, this is not specific to me or to my profession. There's a degree of cussedness that is required where, even if it's hard or if something's not working. And I think that's about the two things, really.
And in research, clearly, you have to keep at it. Like, right, you said that.
You have to keep at it, yeah. Like another colleague of mine says, I'm really giving very wise words now. He always says, you have to throw a lot of mud at the wall and some of it will stick. And the point is to just keep throwing mud at the wall.
So in the end, Radha, since, Atlanta Diaries is a place where, I'm trying to help people learn and unlearn their definitions of success and achievement, any parting thoughts for young leaders, young women, as they find their own greatness?
Yeah, I would say from my perspective, find something you enjoy that gives you joy in the doing of it, because that's what you need for the long haul, right? Everything else is sort of more momentary. Success is sweet, I suppose, no matter what you do, right? We all like to feel good about ourselves. We like to feel, oh yeah, we achieved something. But then you're spending your time for that success, say, and then it's better spent for you. Your life is better spent if it's something you really like doing.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Radha. This was amazing. Thank you for sharing all this.
Thanks for having me. Bye.
Thank you very much for listening. All my guests have brought their most vulnerable selves on Atlanta Diaries. And even if a small segment of these conversations can help champion the journey of one person, it's going to be really worth it. I do have a request for you. Please share this podcast on your social media and with your family and friends. Our society is constantly evolving, and Atlanta Diaries must too. I really appreciate if you can leave your feedback in the form of a review or a rating. These are impactful and rousing stories that need to be shared far and wide. See you next time for another one on Atlanta Diaries.